Crack that whip. Yeah.
You are so distracted. You're like that dog. Squirrel. Anytime there's music, you just lose your total train of thought.
Lamp. Carpet.
Insane.
Hi, good morning. Amy Jacobson here with Sean from Elmwood Park. Sean Thompson in for Dan Proft today. Thank you. You're in our Matrix Home Solutions studio, by the way.
I was
Isn't it
noticing
lovely?
something different.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got a new look.
Yeah.
Changed the curtains.
Although
have
I'm
a new
still
sponsor.
distracted by the face of Lori Lightfoot, which looks a lot like that Geico guy. Go ahead.
All right, so virtual learning. We've been doing it since the beginning of time. No, we've been doing it since last March.
Yeah.
And Jake Tapper put out a tweet, which I loved. Jake Tapper acknowledged health experts are saying the schools should be open now, not within 100 days from January 20th, because Biden said, in the first 100 days, he wants all schools to reopen by the end of the first 100 days. Are you kidding me? There's no science and data to prove that group can't survive. They have a 99.997% survival rate.
Yeah.
And there is not one reported case of student to teacher transmission in any Chicago school, in the Catholic schools and the private schools.
Yeah.
There is no reason. And CPS, Janice Jackson, who, by the way, just got a $40,000 raise. Yeah. Yesterday, $40,000 raise. They even went over, the sanitation that they're going to be doing, temperature checks on the way in, these stupid plexiglass things, masks and all that. But they changed the HEPA air filtration system in every single Chicago public school. That's huge. That's the same filtration system that they have in hospitals, that they have in airplanes.
Contract. Yeah, same
the $9 million contract.
Yeah.
Who got it?
Those
Who got the
HEPA filters,
contract?
they're expensive. They're from China. They're a bunch of paper pushed together. I think they run at least $38,000 a filter.
Wow. And they're still, it's not good enough.
For the school.
It's not good enough for
the school.
CTU.
Yeah.
And teachers, by the way, are third in line to get the vaccine because they're essential workers up there with firefighters, EMTs,
But you're replacing
and restaurant employees.
filters for buildings that are vacant. That's my favorite part of the story.
Oh, I know. Isn't it great?
Yeah.
With more on this and all things COVID, let's welcome back to the program Phil Kerpen. You can find him at Kerpen, Kerpen on Twitter. President of American Commitment and chairman of the Internet Freedom Coalition. Good morning, Phil. How are you?
Hey, good morning. I'm good.
Good. So I follow you on Twitter. You're amazing. And you're talking about D.C. and how many deaths have they had total in the month of December?
40. So it's more than it's been the last few months. It's not like April and May when it was 220, 230. But you know what they call that? They call that winter. So,
No, it's true because
should not be calling for alarm.
Well, in Chicago, before COVID happened, every day in Illinois, about 300 people would die every day from the flu or hypertension or a heart attack or car accidents, cancer. And now there seems to be no flu. Everything is COVID. So for the past 10 days, we've had more than 100 deaths for the past 10 days. And I don't trust those numbers because they consider, dying from COVID or because of COVID. And that's the thing, because we had a friend of the show who was 86 years old. And she had hypertension, and she had congenital heart failure. They tested her all the time for COVID because she was in the hospital and always came back negative. Yet on the death certificate, they put down that it was a COVID death, and the hospital got $38,000.
Yeah, Illinois is very, very aggressive with the coding. Even more so than most of these other states. And we have data for Illinois that we don't have in other places because we have that Cook County. The register that actually shows the cause of death, and we can see that a huge number of the so-called COVID deaths there are things like gunshot wounds and drug overdoses and all this kind of. So you clearly are being very aggressive in terms of anyone who tests positive and then dies of anything. They put it in the count. And, you want to say, oh, they're cheating, they're blowing up, except that the CDC said they can do it. So, we got a lot of places that are using that method of counting anyone who ever tested positive, essentially. New York City, their official definition on their website is anyone who ever tested positive and died of any cause of death within 60 days. That's their official, that's how they're doing it. It's not they're not cheating, they're not pretending, that's just how they're doing it.
Yeah, they put down two suicides as COVID.
Yeah, there was just a story in Colorado. There's a county in Colorado, like a rural county, that only has 5 total COVID deaths, but 2 of them were gunshot wounds. So, this is happening everywhere. And of course, we get into the winter, you have a lot more respiratory disease deaths. The deaths rise in the winter. For some bizarre reason no one can fully understand. As you pointed out, there's no flu anywhere. We had 6 flu cases here in D.C. in the whole week last week. And I think we'll get the national data today, actually, on flu. They post it every Friday, but it's been, instead of the usual, 7% positive rate in the CDC testing, it was 0.12 or something like that the previous week. So we'll see if this week looks any different. But, it's a weird thing because if you've got, 10% of people who are symptoms who are testing positive for COVID, and almost nobody's testing positive, what are the other 90% of people with flu-like symptoms? What do they have? What do they have? So it's a big mystery, I think. But it's a very strange situation. And frankly, we're seeing these enormous numbers now every single day in terms of the COVID death count, but the overall deaths in this country are not up nearly that much. It's not like it was in April where, the overall deaths were dramatically higher. They are higher, but not nearly as much higher as these COVID counts would suggest. So I think we've got a lot of misclassification going on right now.
And Phil, I've always monitored the death totals in America. It's just something we've always looked at. You just look at it. I used to be a commodity trader. It's just something you always keep your eye on, different data points. And if you look at it historically, per month in the year 2020, Americans did not have an uptick in monthly deaths from 2019. And if you go back to 1978, we're actually losing less people per capita. It's not even close how many more Americans were dying per capita in 78 to now. So I've always watched that monthly death rate, and I've never been really shaken or scared or believed the propaganda. But I'm curious to know, Phil, don't you think, in your opinion, if you step back and you look at what the teachers union is in essence doing, which is disenfranchising themselves from their customers, where even hardcore neo-Marxist voters are saying, what are you guys doing, as you're asking in like Chicago and New York, they're asking for pay increases as they're not working. They're asking for all these costs to be bared by the taxpayers. Do you think they run the risk, I'm hoping, by the way, of having people say, no, we've had enough of you people. You're too greedy. You're not producing a product. Your services suck, and we want you gone. Do you think it's a possibility this may backfire for them but fall into our favor?
Well, I sure hope so, or at least, it really ought to give us a lot more momentum for school choice so that we can say, look, if they're refusing to open, you should at least give parents the money so they can send their kids to a school that is open. How do you object to that when the schools are closed? And, I saw Chicago is now following the innovative path from here in D.C., which is having students in a classroom with non-teachers sitting there with computers while the teachers teach them from home. So we've been doing that for months here. So it's so what does that tell you? It's not a safety issue. It's just a pure, union power negotiating, they call it here in D.C., they call it a, quote, workforce issue. So it's not a safety issue. It's a workforce issue. That's people are supposed to nod their head like that makes sense. You have to think that everyone who's got school-age kids who's dealing with this
Me.
can't stand with their, how do you...
My kids go to CPS school, and they're not even in selective enrollment.
But I'm saying is, even if you were a big liberal, how could you be sympathetic to them at this point?
Well, you know what,
all
Phil?
of the data shows that there's no risk to them.
I understand that, but we even the CTU tweeted out, I don't know if you saw it, that the push to reopen schools is sexist, racist, and misogynistic.
They did delete it.
And it got deleted, right? But I had 2 different networks call me and say, "Hey, can you help us out? We're trying to find a CPS parent who's outraged by this." Phil, I couldn't find one, and I coach teams, and I have cheerleading squads in middle schools and in high schools. I could not find one parent because they were afraid to come forward and say something against CPS. These people they're lobotomized. It's unbelievable to me that there's no fight for our children. You think if you're going to fight for something, it would be your kids to be back in school. And in Chicago, they are going back January 11th. Pre-K and special ed programs are going back. And then in February, K through 8. And there's no plan ever this year to have high schoolers go back at all. We're not even we are the bottom of the barrel. They're just letting, high schoolers stay home and do e-learning. But our crime rate has gone up. And the people that are getting arrested for shooting retired firefighters, carjacking, that kid was 15 years old. Another group that was carjacking 2 15-year-olds and a 16-year-old. They should be in school.
It's not even just the crime, but even if the only thing you care about is COVID, you're the most monomaniacal public health COVID person. Do you think that high school kids have more or less social interaction in less controlled settings when you don't let them go to school? They're not sitting at home all day.
No, they check in, they click in at the morning, and then they click in at 3 in the afternoon.
And the other thing too, Phil,
I've watched it.
They're interacting with lots of people with zero precautions and zero distance or any of that. There would be less spread of the disease. If you were monomaniacally obsessed with that disease, there would be less if they were sitting in classrooms.
And the reality is it's also having an effect on their mental stability and their mental status, depression, suicides. These are things we don't talk about anymore. And
3 more people committed suicide yesterday. One was a high school athlete in Washington, a volleyball player, and her mom was never depressed before, but she didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. In these Democratic-run states.
The CDC said in June that they had already seen more of just the increase, the excess in teen suicides and drug overdoses than they had seen total COVID deaths. And there have been very few additional COVID deaths since then. There have been a lot of additional suicide and drug overdose deaths. And, of course, we have this idea in this country, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but we never publish suicide statistics for 2 or 3 years because we don't want to inspire copycats. They call it social contagion. And so we don't have the numbers. Nobody's seen them outside of the CDC. But in a couple of years, when we do get them, I think it's going to be really, really shocking how much higher those numbers are for these low age groups relative to the COVID numbers.
So government has figured out that the more it fails at its mission, the more money and power it gets. So it's really not incentivized to actually achieve anything. So which is why I'm now an anarchist. And as you see the American people accept this Soviet-style government, it took the Soviet Union 72 years to implode. What's your guess, Phil? You seem like a smart guy. How long do you think it'll take us?
Well, we've got essentially 2 totally different countries right now because, and we're going to see the November unemployment by state comes out at 10 o'clock today, and we'll see it again. You've got states that are pretty much normal, and they've got, 3, 4, 5% unemployment. And then you've got states that are pretty much in permanent lockdown, like your own, California, New York, and so forth. And, they're at 7, 8, 9, 10% unemployment. So they're 2 different worlds right now. And, how long can you hold it together when you got sort of totally different governing regimes and essentially totally different economic systems in the same country? So I like to be an optimist. I think that they got all the political mileage out of this, beating Trump and so forth. I think they're going to use the vaccine for a relatively graceful exit from this, although they're going to drag it out for 6 or 8 months instead of 1 or 2, unfortunately. But I think that we end up, everyone more or less back to normal by the end of 2021.
Don't say that. I mean, honestly, I can't take it anymore. The only saving grace we have is if we move on.
I don't want to lie to you. I mean, you don't live in a place that's going to do it quickly.
Right. No, that's true. And I have this thing called an ex-husband, but I'm going to talk to my former divorce attorney because we're not staying here next year. I am not doing this again next year.
All right.
I have put my foot down, and I've already looked at schools in Northwest Indiana, and I've told my kids, they're going to be 18, so you can decide what you want to do. You'll have in charge of your future. So I want to make sure that they get a chance at something because sitting in the basement for, my God, we're coming up on a year here, and it's not working. They need socialization. They need sports because sports builds character. And 33 states around us have sports. They had fall seasons. They had football championships last week, and I watched it. I couldn't believe it. It's just shocking.
Yeah, this is the other thing. The lockdown states have not done any better with the disease than the states that are open. They've actually done worse. But, I mean, so what is it all for? What is all the pain and sacrifice for when it doesn't seem to help with the disease?
Control. I think it's for control. And I have a business in Florida. I go back and forth on the difference between the 2 states.
Oh, isn't it like
it's mind-boggling?
It's mind-boggling. So, all right, Phil Kerpen, we're up against
I wanted to talk to Phil more.
All right, well, one more question. Hurry up.
No, that's all right.
No, I want to know what you want to ask him.
Phil, I wanted to know, in your opinion, the kind of division we have in this country. I remember reading a while ago that there was a Russian professor who predicted America in the future would be 6 smaller countries. Do you think this is the beginning of the next true separation of America as people are refusing to tolerate the incompetence and fraud in government?
I think that if we were any other country with any other history, it probably would have happened by now. But I think we're still so deeply scarred by the Civil War that I think we hang together.
All right. Yeah, at force. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Phil Kerpen. You can follow him on Twitter, and I suggest all of you do at Kerpen, Kerpen. And Phil, thank you so much for joining us. I always appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks, you too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. Home Depot faces nearly $21 million in fines. Mortgage interest rates falling again. A fire killing tens of thousands of chickens at a Florida farm. Those stories next. You've all probably heard of asbestos and know that it's dangerous. And you may also know exposure to asbestos is the only known cause of mesothelioma, a deadly cancer. People who were exposed to asbestos decades ago